Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Latino Vote podcast. It's been a couple of weeks. We have heard the yearnings out into the fields. I think Mike has been in the south of France. We finally got him back. And for all of you YouTube subscribers, you're right. We have dressed as each other this morning. The game today is pick out which bald-headed Mexican in a black shirt looks the best. Mikey?
I don't think I'm going to do too well in that category. I mean, I've ceded that ground to you entirely.
My lighting is so much better than your lighting.
I'm going to say it's the lighting. I'm going to give you that. I'm going to say that's probably most of why you look so much better than I do, and better sound quality, better voice. I just got to upgrade it's a technology problem.
You live in Sacramento, and I can tell that you're in Sacramento, so I'm surprised you even have power. I'm surprised some homeless dude hasn't chewed through your electricity and plugged it into his tent.
I'm looking out at the homeless right now over my front porch. Sacramento. The worst part of Sacramento is it's just living in the worst part of the best state in the country. Like, you get to say from California, and then it's like Sacramento, and it's like, ooh, Sacramento. Like, you're so close and yet so far.
Well, it's been 2 weeks since we've had a podcast. There's been a lot going on. I can't wait before I turn on the Mike Madrid spigot, because he's going to dump. If any of you who follow Mike Madrid on Twitter, he has got hot takes on lots of things over the last 2 weeks, and he has been traveling, so we haven't heard from him. So I don't think he's in a bad mood, because we're doing this in an afternoon. Normally the morning is my time. The afternoon is Mike's time, because about 2 hours from now, we're doing this at like 4 o'clock. I'll fall asleep. Let's be clear. So, Mike, tell us what's been going on.
For those of you that don't know, by the way, Chuck Rocha is not awake after like 7:30 p.m. He's like the old man who comes knocking in. He steps in there and he's out. Up early. I mean, up at like 4 in the morning.
5 a.m., right?
5 a.m. But, man, he's just out like 8 a.m. I'll see him at a conference. Let's go out, tie a couple on, have some drinks, get caught up. He's like, nope. Let's do that over breakfast, over coffee in the morning or whatever. But
now the sun stays up so long that I got to wait for the sun to go down. And now it's messing with my sleep.
It's funny.
Oh, man, in the river.
Yeah. So look, a lot has been going on here. All of it, I think, really good, because it's concentrated this focus on what we think about day in and day out, the Latino vote, obviously. More polling, but the polling is all over the place. So I do want to talk about a little bit of it. So there's that. The second I want to talk about is Joe Biden had his big launch on his big Univision interview with Arantxa Loizaga. We should talk a little bit about that, because the substance, I thought, was very significant. And this, I think, was really kind of the bookend to Arantxa, the reporter's interview of Donald Trump that created such a kerfuffle. There's your word for the day, a kerfuffle, Chuck.
I'll never figure that out. Kerfuffle.
How do you say kerfuffle in Spanish, by the way? Do you know?
Kerfuffle.
Oh, man. We need to do this more in the afternoon. This is better.
Kerfuffle.
Yeah.
All right. So what have you been taking? Let's go with the polls first. There's been a lot of polls out in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Tell me consolidate it down to just a Mike Madrid. What the hell's going on?
Okay. So look, all of these public polls have been showing Trump with these oddly high numbers with Latino voters, anywhere from, mid 40s to high 40s. Look, and I think that those numbers are not accurate. They're not. The criticisms of them are very valid and they're very fair. The sample sizes are too small. There are probably some problems with a lack of Spanish language interviews. But what I will say is this: the methodologies that are being used now are no different than they were in 2020 or 2016 or 2012, and they weren't showing these big, huge numbers. And again, they're not outliers. They're consistent across every public poll that's out there. So here's my take on it. I want to know what your thoughts are, Chuck. What I'm going to say is I don't believe that they're accurate. Okay, I'm not saying I don't believe that. I don't believe that Donald Trump is touching 50% of the Latino vote. I've never believed that any Republican could get there. Not even George W. when I was doing those races back in the day. I certainly don't think it's true of Donald Trump, but I do believe that Republicans are hitting a higher point in their historical range, and I think they're going to sit there probably going forward. I think it's more likely that Republicans ultimately hit 40 than drop back down into the 20s. So if you asked me today, if I was a betting man, and I hate to do this because I don't like to prognosticate, but if you asked me where I thought we were at, where Trump, Biden are at, I think Trump's probably sitting at about a 34, 35% range, which is a tad lower than he was in the 2020 cycle. I think it's more likely that he goes a little bit lower than a little bit higher, but we're still in that 33, 37 point range. And what do you think?
Well, I've been looking at the polls. You know how good I am with them numbers. And so when I've been looking at the numbers, there's a couple of things that jump out to me. And I've kind of looked at it the same way you have. But what I've done is separate things in my mind. And for those of you listening, you should do this as well, is when we talk about the national Latino support and they try to do a Latino poll, whether they're talking to 100 Latinos or talking to 300 Latinos or 3,000 Latinos, a national survey you can get a trend from, but a national survey literally has zero to do with the presidential elections. And let me explain, is that the presidential elections, like we talked about, is just going to be won or lost in about 6 states. And as we get closer to those election days and they start doing some larger samples in just those battleground states, that's the real polls that, because I don't care. And Mike's right. I don't care how Latinos think about Trump and Biden in California. I don't care how they think about them in New York or in Florida. Now, what I just said was New York, Florida, and California. That's where probably 60% of all Latinos in America live, is in those 3 states. Okay, let's throw in Texas for shits and giggles. Now we're at 60% of all the Latinos in the whole country. And guess what? They're not going to see any ads from Biden. They're not going to see any ads of Trump. Trump's going to overperform in all of those places because he's such a big anomaly and he's got Fox News and there's nobody competing for their vote. If there's one thing that we learned in the last election is when Democrats actually stand up and fight back and spend a lot of money on Spanish and English advertising in places like Arizona and Nevada, they win. They won the Senate races there. Now, did they have some grand strategy? No. They just said, oh, my God, in 2020, we got our butt handed to us. The Latino vote shifted 8 points. We're finna spend a whole bunch of money in these states to make sure that we don't lose any more ground. And they didn't. It evened out. It was about even. Now, really what happens, me and Mike don't know. We can talk about it. What happens now when there's this national thing, when there's Senate races? But only thing that matters to me in polling is going to be in those particular races where there's a real fight for that vote, where Democrats and Republicans are having an old school narrative argument on who has the best concept of what people really care about. And I think we're going to learn more and more about that every week when we get closer to November. You think, Mike?
Yeah, and we'll go state by state because Chuck's right. When you add in Texas, Florida, California, New York, Illinois, I mean, you're talking 80% of the vote is basically locked up. But, and this is why we started the podcast, and this is why I think the Latino vote is so important. That remaining 20% is in Nevada, it is in Arizona, it is in Georgia, it is in Wisconsin, it is in North Carolina, it is in Pennsylvania. Right, all the battleground states is where you're going to have a decisive. The Latino vote will be within the margin of error in at least 4 out of those 5. Okay, so that, and we're going to go state by state, by the way, as we get closer to this. Once the polling gets tighter, the numbers look more real as voters start to focus in a little bit more. And I strongly believe we're going to start seeing the numbers tightening up into a more normal range. I have been saying for many months, the fundamentals for this race strongly look good for Joe Biden. I've got some issues with the campaign. That's just part of the business. That's what we do. It's why we're here on the podcast. I think the Latino vote will largely tighten up into a new historical range, which is higher than it has been. But those race by races, we're going to start state by states, we're going to start getting a much better look. And as we get into the summertime, we'll probably have some guests with specialists on the campaigns on respective sides to pepper them and to ask some really tough questions from a practitioner's perspective on each of those 5 battleground states. So really looking forward to that. Chuck, let's talk a little bit now about the Univision interview. Can we jump to that, or am I getting ahead of the agenda?
I thought we weren't going to do no more. I thought we were boycotting Univision. Did somebody show up over there and do a debate? I thought that was done like when he did. We weren't going over there no more.
Enrique Acevedo.
It happened.
Yeah, it happened yesterday. And I I've invited Enrique to be on the show. I hope I'm not getting ahead of myself. I think
is he that really
there.
good-looking guy, the salt and pepper? Like, I wish I had his hair and his accent,
imagine?
and he's skinny. Like, my God, I'd have already died of some kind of disease.
If I was skinny and had hair and like,
he is a good-looking man.
Man,
look at us embracing our sexuality on the Latino Vote podcast. Yeah. We can appreciate a good-looking man.
Yeah, and I just think of how much brighter the future would be looking if I was like suave like Enrique Acevedo.
And so how did he do in the interview?
I thought he did. I did watch it only in large part because he took so much flack and so much criticism for the Trump interview. We talked about that at length. This was I wanted to see, like, does he give it to Joe Biden? Does he throw a couple haymakers at him? Does he go soft? Does he go easy? What does he bring up? I thought it was very well done, very professional. And again, I think the guy's a pro anyway. But what I will say is this: Biden, I think, very astutely takes the opportunity to say, I need the vote, looking for your vote, pushing for your vote. But I'm also going to be announcing some very significant policy changes coming from the Biden administration, specifically as it relates to asylum changes and effectively shutting down the southern border. This is extremely significant. And I don't think it's bad, by the way. I think
he said this on Univision.
Yeah.
A Spanish network.
Which is awesome. I mean, look, I'm not saying I like the policy. Okay. I don't like the policy. I don't like the political environment that we're in, but I'm really inspired by the fact that the adults in the room at the Biden headquarters, and I know who they are and who they're not now, and who they're not is different than it was 4 months ago, are saying, no, we're going straight at this. We're going hard at this because not only are the American voters there and people are demanding it, but the Latino vote is there. That's where we're going to pick up these votes that we've been bleeding for the past few years. And they're absolutely 100% right. That, of course, is my perspective. But I can't tell you how refreshing it is to see a Democrat splitting away from the racial ethnic narrative on immigration when that has consumed the Democratic Party since at least 2014. I would argue maybe 2012, since Obama became the deporter in chief, and this crazy doubling down on saying immigration is the touchstone racial issue for our community when it has never been the case. And I love the fact that Biden is the one who is distancing himself from that element in the Democratic Party. Why? Because that's how you win. That's how he's going to win this race. One, it's also very healthy for the Latino community to get off the teat of immigration and start behaving like a more mature community with a broader range of issues that the polling has been saying is very important to our community, starting with jobs and the economy, number one. Healthcare is up there as a 2 or 3, housing affordability, all these issues that Latinos have been telling us quantifiably they want to hear addressed. All we've heard from both parties is border issues, and there are too many politicians on both sides of the aisle playing into that narrative. There's too many political consultants, Latino political consultants, playing into that narrative. I'm done with it. I've had it. The voters, Latino voters, are saying they've had it, and it was really refreshing to see Biden go on Univision and say, "Ya basta, enough. We're not. The Democrats are moving in a very different direction." What do you say?
I think that's right. And for those of you who watch these interviews and who haven't worked on a presidential campaign, things don't normally happen off the cuff unless it's Donald Trump. Donald Trump does not follow a script, and what he says is like not been poll tested a lot of times, even though I think that his team has gotten better at that. Joe Biden knew what he was going to say before he walked in there. You should not fool yourself. He knew what he was going to say. When I used to take and do Bernie in this way, when we used to have campaign, there's certain things that you need to make sure are said in an interview, no matter what the question is. And what this said to me, and I did get to watch, not all of it, but I watched most of it. Some of us are busy over here trying to win a city council election, but that's a conversation for another day. But the one I did watch, I thought he did a great job. I think Joe Biden was very respectful to our community. And I think that the questions that he answered was like, explaining what he had done for our community. Because when you're in a focus group, that's what Latina voters are saying. I want to know what he's going to do in the next 4 years to make my life even better. Sure, there's things that you've done now. You've taken the price of insulin and brought it down, or you've forgiven this college loan, or you've gotten me a job in this construction trade because we have this infrastructure bill. He needs to build those bridges between those narratives to explain what he's doing to make his job better, and that he's competent enough to pull it off, and that he's not too old to be president, because that's what the Republicans have done a remarkably good job at, saying that he's senile and he's old. That's why I think the State of the Union was so good, because he showed a lot of fire. He showed a lot of grit, and like people enjoy that. They like to see that in their politicians. People want to see folks that are fighting for you. And for folks that thinks he went off the rail when he was talking about the border, he did not. He had protested that. He knows he has a problem. And I can tell you, as somebody working on lots of races in Arizona and lots of races in Nevada, that I see the same numbers that he's seeing. And for the first time in a long time, the immigration issue really around border security, not about forgiveness or asylum. It's about security of the border and about legalizing and making the system fair. I've been telling every politician I'm working with, we can be a nation of immigrants and a nation of laws at the same time. And we can make sure that bad people ain't getting in, and we get as many good people in this country as we can. And folks all over the Southwest understand that narrative, but they also know that the system is broken. And I think that's why you saw Joe Biden go down the path that he went down.
You sound like a Republican.
I do not. Take that out of your mouth. You're trying to get me fired? Yeah. I'm a highly paid Democratic operative. Kiss my butt.
This is you sound like a pre-2016 Republican.
Okay, I'll take some
pre-Trump
of that.
Republican. And I mean that in the most complimentary of ways, because
I do own a small business now, a little old small business in DC.
It ain't that little. It ain't that little. He's worried about marginal tax rates is what he's worried about. The idea that we can be a nation of laws and a nation of immigrants is the rhetoric that we as Republicans before the crazy took over. That's exactly right. And this shouldn't feel uncomfortable for Democrats. And I have been pleased at how little resistance there has been. You're not seeing these stories leaking out into Politico with, upset Biden campaign staffers saying, how dare he, blah, blah, blah. There was that one little blip when he said illegal at the State of the Union, but so what? I mean, that's just weird internal, campaign politics. But it's not like you saw staffers walking out the way they did in like the Hamas Gaza situation, where people are just so pissed off at Biden. And that's in large part because I think the reality is setting in that the vote has moved, the community has moved. Any Latino who's out there, y'all are going to agree with this. Our families, 90% of our families are worried more about paying the mortgage than they're worried about waking up in the middle of the night and being deported by ICE. Now, and I'm not saying we have to live in a bipolar world, but damn it, come on, as political professionals, start prioritizing where our community's at. And this is not just right-wing Mike Madrid saying this. Go ahead and dismiss it if you want, because he's a crazy-ass Republican. The freaking data has been saying this for decades. For decades, our community has been crying out for an aspirational economic agenda. Every poll I have seen for the past 30 years, and I have looked at probably every last one of them, has jobs in the economy as number one. You can't tell me either party has won the battle for branding the economy and jobs specifically towards the Latino community. There's a huge opening for both parties. The Republicans are really missing the ball because they don't like the multi-ethnic America that's emerging. I'm going to say that. And one of the great hypocrisies, one of the things that really pisses me off is you've got these Republican consultants saying, oh, we're going to win half the Latino vote. We're going to, break 50%. And at the same time, they're saying, we don't want any more Mexicans or any more Latinos in here. It's like, if you really believed you were doing that well with the Latino community, you'd want more people here. So it's one or the other. You can't have it both ways. And at the same time, Democrats will say, well, we're the party of the working class because it's all about unions and it's all about, minimum wage. And it's like, no, it's not about either of those with blue collar folks. I mean, there's some elements of that, but that's not speaking for 90% of the community, of our community. Latinos have the lowest unionization rate of any race or ethnic group in the entire country. It's a blue-collar working class community. These are Reagan Democrats. I'll say it again. Mike Madrid said that. It wasn't Chuck. Don't cut his pay. Don't cut his contract. Keep him rich. He's got a huge tax bill to pay.
I do.
But listen, Reagan Democrats, burn that into your mind, especially if you're on the left. This is the words of wisdom, free advice. Mike Madrid, the Republican, giving out free stuff here. Reagan Democrats. You want to keep making the same mistake you did as a Democratic Party in the mid-1980s and set yourself on a generation of losing elections? Go for it, because the opportunity is right there. Or you can learn from it and say, what did we do wrong? What did we do wrong? And how were we not talking to and communicating to people? Because this is your moment to look back at history and correct a political mistake that was made. Because since 2012, Democrats have committed political malpractice with the way that they've handled the Latino vote.
Putting labels on Latinos, we all like to do that. And Reagan Democrats, modern this, liberal this, socialist this. That's what people don't always remember. You know, I got a lot of exposure and got a lot of accolades because Bernie Sanders did really good with Latinos, and he was no Reagan Democrat. But before his hair falls on fire, I would respect that when I say that, Mike always checks me. It's like, well, you was talking about things that were going to make people's lives better, and you were showing up and having a conversation with lots of Democrats don't. And that's true. And that's when people come to me and be like, well, what about this Bernie thing and that? I'm like, look, there's a couple things. Bernie Sanders won the Latino vote, and he was a Democratic socialist. But when I would go talk to them, I would talk to them about things that my mama and papa would think about that were working class, farming, the wages, the health care, the things that people cared about. That's why we won the Texas Valley. But then Trump overperformed there with those same voters, which is crazy if you really think about it. But that makes both perfect sense if you really think about it. And we're living in a time where the bottom line is nothing Mike Madrid says is the absolute truth. Nothing I'm going to say is absolute truth. All the things that are happening, and there's a lot of shifting happening. Nothing is shifting all at one time, but there's a lot of small reasons that it's just not like it was. We are coming of age so much faster than white people and black people. Then that spread over getting our information over a bazillion channels, TikTok, Instagram, everything else. I was in a focus group and looking at a poll just last week, and YouTube is still by far the biggest place Latinos are getting information. Mm-hmm. And I thought you just went there to figure out how to fix your stove, because that's where I'm at there most of the time. But folks are literally Googling. And the second thing I'll say, Mike, that I learned this week, I was doing some research because this is going to be hard for you to believe. I know you're in the south of France and you don't know I was there, but I went to Chicago this week for a convention of the Midwest political scientists. These are folks who teach the political science at the universities of our brightest minds of our children. And they've got a Latino caucus of these political science. And so I went there. Nothing says political science and professional scholars like Chuck Rocha. Mm-hmm. There was a great Latino professor from American University. I know they're probably a rival of that Georgetown thing you went to, but he invited me to come.
Not much.
I came and they asked me a lot of good questions. But in my research of looking at this going out there, I realized that I talked to a digital friend of mine who does a lot of digital consulting. And I said, what's the biggest difference you see with young voters today than you saw 8 years ago? This is long in the tooth guy, like 50, 60 years old dude. He said, the young kids no longer go to Google to search information. He said they go to whatever social app they're on to search information about what's going on in the world. It could be TikTok, it could be Instagram, it could be YouTube, I guess. But that's the biggest single change that he's seeing of like, where do they go? They're not watching TV. And so it makes me think about, you have a whole generation of people who aren't even searching. Of course, we have a whole generation of people who aren't watching TV. But like these changes, I think are exactly what Mike is talking about. Reagan Democrats, conservative Democrats, crazy Republicans, common sense Republicans. These young kids who are coming up don't know which one of those ideologues they fall into. And so they're searching to figure out who is mine, who is with me. You see people talking about the youth going to Trump, and I think some of them are. I don't think it's an absolute. Nothing is an absolute, but I think things are changing. Do you agree or disagree with all this crazy random on?
Yeah, let me take it a little step further. I mean, when especially this is why when you and I first started really talking on a more regular basis, when you were doing a lot of work with Bernie, the Trump-Bernie phenomenon. Again, these are the two U.S. politicians that dramatically overperformed with Latinos when nobody was expecting them. And you have to step back and look at that objectively and say, why? And the answer really comes back to populism. Both of their messages were that the system is rigged and the establishment is not serving you. In fact, it's probably working against your interests. They weren't trying to sell us the right or the left, the standard Democratic orthodoxy or the standard Republican orthodoxy. They were selling populism, and Latinos were responding to that. And that's extremely important to understand. The second is, again, more to your point, the coalitions that are making up both of the parties are not what they used to be when Chuck and I were younger. Okay. And Chuck and I, we talk about this. We do this a lot when we do live appearances. Is if we talked about the redneck guy in a cowboy hat from the Rio Grande Valley, Chuck Rocha would have been a Republican. Talk about a Ventura County suburban kid from Southern California who, scratched his way to get into a Georgetown University. You're talking about a Democrat. But when we were coming of age in the business and in life, that was exact reverse. Those were different. And that's the way we've kind of propelled ourselves. And I think because we're Latinos, we have the ability to see that change in both parties in a way that I think is unique. But the coalitions between the working class and the college-educated class are changing in both parties, and Republicans are losing their suburban college-educated, especially women, in the time of the loss of abortion and reproductive rights so fast they don't know what to do with themselves. This was just a base vote. And it's also completely inconceivable for white progressives to believe that Black and brown people will not automatically vote for the Democratic Party. Like they can't conceive it, so they don't even acknowledge that it's a problem. They're just like, oh, it's a methodology problem. Oh, no, it's not happening. This isn't really happening. And then when they do happen, it says, oh, it's misinformation on WhatsApp, or there has to be some sort of nefarious activity because it's not possible for people to see things so societally in a way that I do not or that we do not, especially Black and brown people. That's changing on both sides. And look, I will say it till the cows come home. I don't know if that's a cowboy hat term or not.
Just keep going. You're on it. Keep going.
Republicans are not winning the Latino vote. They're getting more votes despite their best efforts, not because of them. They don't have a silver bullet, and they're not doing anything particularly right. They're just kind of sitting there while the realignment that's happening between college-educated and blue-collar workers, and the fastest growing segment of blue-collar workers happens to be Latino, so they're picking them up. That's what's going on, by and large. Now, there are some nuances, of course, and we talk about those, but those shifting coalitions and the shifting parties are far more profound than I think most people give credit for or observe, because we're so stuck institutionally and looking at red versus blue, R versus D, right versus left. No one has taken into consideration that maybe there's no right left anymore. Maybe it's top down. Maybe that's why Bernie Sanders was so connecting so much with Latinos. Maybe that's why Trump is overperforming with Latinos, is because we're not seeing the world as right and left. We're seeing the world between haves and have-nots. People
right
with opportunity. Exactly. Right, wrong, up, down, inside or outside.
Yep, I agree.
And establishment versus anti-establishment. I think that to me explains.
That's brilliant. No, that's good. Like I never really thought about that, but you're so right, because all Bernie Sanders talked about was the millionaires and the billionaires and all of that, right? And Donald Trump's railing against his best friends, even though he don't mean it. So it's just like the same verbiage is there. Let's shift on our last piece of this thing. There's a big thing that came down yesterday in Arizona, where the Supreme Court in Arizona upheld a law from, I think, like 1863. Mike, I know you were probably in middle school.
1864.
Was it 64?
I
don't even
freshman
know.
High school. Freshman high school.
The 64 Fighting Maniacs. But anyway, so this is a crazy law, y'all. So Donald Trump also this week, I want to talk about these two together because I want Mike's hot take on this. Donald Trump has tied himself in a knot trying to be on every side of this issue because, as you said, it's such a salient issue that women care about. No matter the color of your skin, this is so personal to them. And nothing says women's issues like two old bald-headed Mexicans. So let's talk about it like we know what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. But we know politics. And it takes a stupid fool not to understand that the politics of this is killing the Republican Party, especially when you have a Republican Supreme Court in Arizona that passed or upheld an arcane law. And then you had Donald Trump saying, well, I think it should just be controlled by the states. Like, what do you think, Mike?
Kari Lake distanced herself from, Kari Lake is the crazy wing of the crazy party. And she's like, this is too much.
She's like, when you are too crazy for Kari Lake, yeah, I'm with you.
That's how nuts this is, right? And I love watching these guys squirm because I will say, there is no right answer on abortion for Republicans. There is no right answer. Right. People don't trust you on it. Right. So the more you're talking about it, there's no like 15 weeks, 6 weeks, partial.
If you're explaining it, you're losing.
If you're explaining that issue as Republican, you're fucked, man. And that's what. And so to watch his different answers, and then he does a video, and then a new decision comes out the next day, and Florida's got the problem, and Arizona's got the problem, and it's like it's a disaster. And there's enough.
Did you hear that Mike Pence weighed in and was solely disappointed in the president? You should know that.
Is that true?
It's true. Swear to God.
That's where Mike Pence could just stick a shiv in this guy and just kill him with the evangelicals. It's just, he peels off a couple percentage points and he's done because Trump, he got rid of Roe versus Wade and he wants to take credit, but now he's trying to distance himself and say, no, all these states are going to get it right. What the hell does that even mean? No, I'm not for an abortion ban. And the evangelicals were like, wait, that's the real goal. It wasn't Roe Wade. It was a national ban. Like, we seriously want this policy. And he's like, wait, are you kidding me? Like, people really want this? Like, I had 15 girlfriends in my 20s and 30s that I paid the abortions for. Donald Trump doesn't believe this. Nobody buys that. And so he doesn't have an answer. But the truth is the Republican Party doesn't have an answer. And as long as the debate is talking about what his solution or his plan is, he is losing. And again, inspiring confidence. Biden's people had the president's message in the can waiting for it to go. Biden taped a video in Delaware. And when they launched it, he wasn't even in Delaware. They were just waiting for this to come down and just completely hit a bullseye with it because they know that the more they can keep the media narrative on this issue, that there is no good answer for Kari Lake. There is no good answer for Donald Trump. There is no good answer for whoever the crazy guy is in North Carolina. The new poll just came out, by the way. That Republican governor's down 8 points in North Carolina. North Carolina's in play, y'all. I've been saying it a long time. This should be running Latino voter registration effort for the Democrats there, but I think this is going to be a fiasco for the Republicans, because they can't help themselves by trying to explain their way out of it when the answer is really to just switch sides and distance yourself from the evangelical base.
If you want to know how big of an issue it is, you don't need to listen to me and Mike Madrid. But the president literally had a video ready to go as soon as this thing was announced. But more so than that, something that was in the can for at least a month, if not months. Excuse me. They came out with one of the most moving, heart-wrenching ads I had ever seen. I was on CNN yesterday. Me and Jim Acosta played the ad live on air. This woman is in her room just crying because she may lose her life in Texas because she don't have access not because she's a teenage girl in trouble and all the things that everybody likes. No, this is a grown woman trying to have a baby to build on her family. She's already got other babies. And to watch the anguish and the real crying and the real emotional torment that these women go through. Look, I'm not a woman. I ain't never going to be asked like I know anything about a woman. But I will tell you, it made me kind of well up, and I'm an ignorant old man. So to know the emotional connection that these women have between each other cannot be more emphasized. And that ad being ready to go, him having a statement, them knowing exactly what they're doing. And then on top of this, y'all, me and Mike were off the last 2 weeks. In the last couple of weeks, these ballot initiatives have made it on the ballots in places like Arizona. So now in Arizona, you can literally say, if you disagree with what the Supreme Court just did, you can now vote to codify this in your state constitution where they can never take it away from you. That's powerful messaging in a contrast for all of you novice political consultants. It's exactly the environment that you want to have. They're doing the same thing in Nevada. And then the last place they've just did this and got it on the ballot with the Republican Supreme Court in Florida. of all places, said you could now do this in Florida. Now in Florida, because Florida's going to Florida, you got to get 60% to pass it. But they still could pass it. Other things have passed in Florida with over 60%, like passing the minimum wage. So I think that this is still going to be the defining issue. Democrats are going to use it till they don't need to use it anymore. But it's a good issue that never goes away. And I think that that's going to be what the 2024 election will be about more so than a Trump versus Biden. Don't you think, Mike?
I do. And, 60% sounds like a lot. It's not on an issue like this. You can get there for sure. Right. And the reason is because you're going to have two key constituencies. You're going to have the defection of Republican women, white suburban women, and Latinas, especially second, third generation. And I write about this, in the book. The abortion issue, by the way, has always been a winning issue for Latino voters. The Democrats have been afraid of it because they're like, oh, there's this Catholic thing. That's never been the case. Especially Mexican Catholicism has never been driven by social issues. And the more this becomes a second and third generation Latino electorate, these women are voting like their non-Hispanic white counterparts, their African-American counterparts. They're voting like women, like American women. They're not voting as ethnic issues or religious issues. And when we're talking about numbers, it's well over 60%. And Latinos, I think, they're going to be a force to be reckoned with. And not just this election cycle, which they will be. This is a generational moment, a generational defining moment, because when you become politicized in this environment, it's going to last you at least 2 decades, at least 20 years, probably your whole lifetime.
Well, that's it for this week for the Latino Vote podcast. I want to thank everybody for listening. And also, I'd like to say the real reason for the Catholicism with Mexican is built around guilt. We all know that. That's the reason that people are Catholic and the reason they go to church. Look, call your mama, go to church with her, and tell her to listen to the Latino Vote podcast. That can solve all of our problems. Don't forget to share. Don't forget to like. Mike, you got something to take us out with?
I do. On Monday, Chuck and I will be live in New York City doing a Latino Vote.
I forgot about that.
You better show up. If I'm flying all the way out from California, you just got to take a quick train ride
New
from DC.
York City. Where are we going to be at?
We're going to be with Televisa. With who are we going to be with? Boy, we should.
No, we're going to be with Telemundo.
We're going to be with Telemundo doing the Latino Vote. It's on the Latino Vote, and I'm excited about this because I think we're going to have a really great audience there live. If you're in the New York City area, hit us up on comments. Follow us both on Twitter. Shoot us a quick note. We will be promoting it a little bit more over the next couple of days. This is going to be, I think, the first time Chuck and I do this for the 2020 cycle in person. We'll probably do it 3 or 4 more times in other cities. But this is going to be kind of, I think, the big launch one. And I can't wait to see the crowd. I think it's going to be a good audience. And we will probably use most of that for next week's podcast because we'll both be traveling so much next week. But I'm going to take it with that. We'll be promoting it. We'll be pushing it. Chuck, I will see you on Monday. And the rest of you, we will be airing next Wednesday, Thursday. And until then, cuídate mucho, take care, and we'll see you next week.
Take care, everybody.